All right. Good evening, everyone. So we find ourselves on Mem Vav Amid, well, Mem Zayin Amid Aleph, really, but we're gonna backtrack a little bit to Mem Vav Amid Beis to the bottom of 46b because the topic begins on the last few lines there. So I was gonna just summarize what we covered, but for the same amount of time, we could just reread it. So let's just do that. So we're gonna begin with the words Amar Rav Yehuda, Berei Rav Shmuel. It's the fourth to last line on the Amud, and basically our main topic for this evening is Shmini Atzeres. So, as you may have noticed, there are variances on whether some people will sit in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, some people won't. I don't think anyone makes a bracha, and it all emerges from this Gemara. And I have a very strong opinion on the matter because it's not my opinion, but it's the conclusion of the Gemara. And in case you don't know it, it was worth coming this evening. So I'll let the Gemara do the talking for itself. Here
Is
we
it
go, my friends. Right, we have the
size?
place
What page is it? Page seven.
46b on the bottom.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Amarav
You said
Yehuda
Ahmed
Bereid Rav.
Aleph.
A what?
I thought you said Mem Vav Amud Aleph.
Amid Beis.
Uh-huh. Okay.
We're
Thank
going
you.
to be on Mem Zayin Amid Aleph. That's our actual Amid for tonight, but we're backtracking to the bottom of Mem Vav Amid Beis
Okay.
just because that's
Okay.
where it begins, really. Okay,
Thank you.
absolutely. All right, now that we are oriented, Amar Rav Yehuda Bereid Rav Shmuel Bar Shilas Mishmei Der Rav. Opinion number one is Shmini Safik Shvi, right? So Shmini Atzeres. But again, in the diaspora in Gullus, we say, well, it's Sveikadiyoma, so it's really Shmini Atzeres, but it's a suffix. Maybe it's the seventh day of Sukkot. Um, so Shvi LaSukkah Ushmini LaBracha. We regard it as the seventh day of Sukkot regarding the Sukkah, meaning dwelling in the Sukkah. Ushmini lebracha, on the eighth day vis-a-vis the bracha, meaning we would not make a leishiv basukah because sveikadiyoma, maybe it's Shmini Atzeres, and there's no longer a mitzvah sukkah, so safek brachos sahakel. Rav Yochanan Amar Shmini lezel lezer. Rav Yochanan says it's considered to be Shmini Atzeres through and through. We ignore the sveikadiyoma, you don't sit in the sukkah, and you certainly don't make a bracha on sitting in the sukkah. That's the initial way to understand this. However, there's really two different ways to render this. The first part we saw at the beginning of last week, and we'll see a second way to render this right now. After this. So, Mesav, Kuliyama lo pli diasvinan, both opinions actually agree that you do need to sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. Ki pligi lebruche. Their only question is whether you also make a bracha on dwelling in the sukkah. So lamad amar shvi l'sukkah bruchi nami varchinan. So according to the first opinion, who says we regard today as shvi, as the seventh day, even though it's Shmini Atzeres, you would also make a bracha of leishe basukah. Alamad amar shmi lezeh lezeh. According to Mad Amar, who says it's considered Shmini Atzeres for all matters. We don't play games and pretend that it might be day seven of Sukkot. Bruchi lo mevarchinan, and then we don't make a bracha because it's really Shmini Atzeres. And we looked at Tosos last time. Tosos said, I don't get it. If we're willing to play this game of saying Shmini Atzeres is suffix seventh day for dwelling in the Sukkah, why don't we take the Arba Minim? Why don't we take the Lulav and Esrog? Because it's a suffix, maybe it's Sukkot. So Tosus last time told us because these things would be, I guess, it would be muksa, and it's very. That's one thing, and then also people dwell in huts all the time, even outside the context of sukkahs. We talked about a sukkahs ganvach in the first parak, sukkahs that would just be huts that be made for people to dwell outside. So that it's not so clear that the reason you're sitting in the sukkah is going to be a contradiction to Shmini Atzeres. But taking a lulav and esrog on Shmini Atzeres is a contradiction to the day. Because Shmini Atzeres is specifically not Sukkot. We'll see at the end of the Gemara, Mem Zayin Aleph 47a, welcome. We'll see at the end of the Gemara tonight that Shmini Atzeres is definitively considered a separate holiday. Not in this Gemara, but elsewhere. Um, Hashem says, Kasha lai predaschem. That's so difficult for me to part with you. I'd love to have one more day to spend together, and hence we get Shmini Atzeres. It's a great topic. I'm sure you've heard it cited in a drasha at some point. If not, worth coming here this evening to hear about it. All right. Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Nakut to Rav Yochanan biyadecha. Take Rav Yochanan, hold him in your hands. He's got the right opinion over here. Rav Huna bar Bizna, the Chol Gedole Hador, Iklu B'Sukkah B'Shmini Safek Shvi, because all of these esteemed Gedole Hador, the entire Moetzes Gedole Torah the Agudas Yisrael, showed up to his Sukkah, and it was on Shmini Atzeres. Mesiv Havu Yasve, Bruche Lo Briche. So it sounds like the opinion of Rav Yochanan, that you sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, but you just don't make a bracha of Leishei Basukkah. Seems to be in accordance with Rav Yochanan. However, the Gemara challenges this and says, "V'dilma Svir Lukamad Damar Kimin Sheberach Yantif Rishon Shavina Mavarich." There is an opinion that once you've already made a leishev on the first day of Sukkot, that will count for the rest of Yantif. We explored this in a previous year. So maybe the reason they didn't make a bracha is just because they already were Yotzei the bracha of Leishei Basukkah, and they hold you only have to make it once. So that's not a proof that you don't make a bracha on Shmini Atzeres. Had they just never had the opportunity to make the bracha, and then they showed up on Shmini Atzeres, maybe they would make a bracha, unlike the Shita of Rav Yochanan. So the Gemara says, Gemiri Demei Afar Asu. We have a tradition that they came from the fields. They were, according to Tosfos, they were busy shepherding their flocks, though some of the Mefarshim find that a little bit hard to believe that if they were the Gedolei Hador, what were they doing neglecting to sit in the sukkah the rest of the days of Sukkot? The first night of Sukkot, when you dafka have to be in the sukkah, it's hard to believe they were just out in the fields the whole time. So possibly, there was persecution. That's potentially an issue as well. All right, but the point being here is that it could very well be that they did not have the opportunity to make the bracha, and therefore, by the fact that they made it on Shmini Atzeres, demonstrates that it is indeed day worthy. For the fact that they did not make the bracha demonstrates that you don't make a bracha on Shmini Atzeres in any event, even though they in theory would have been chayiv had they arrived on Sukkot itself. This was all the first version of how the conversation went down. If you recall, all of this centered around the premise that everyone agrees you have to go and sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. The only machlokes was, do you make a bracha of leishev as well? Then the Gemara says, Ika da'amre, there is another version of this that was built on a different premise. Baruche kuli amalo pligi. It wasn't even a havamina. Everyone agrees you do not make a bracha of leishev on Shmini Atzeres. It is not sukkahs. Ki pligi lemesav. The machlokes is, do you sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres? So let's follow through. Let's plug it in. Laman de amar shiva l'sukkah mesav yasvinan. According to the first opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Bered Rav Shmuel that we saw at the beginning of the Gemara, that says we regard Shmini Atzeres like it is the seventh day of Sukkot, then you do sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. Laman de amar Shmini l'zeh mesav nami lo yasvinan. And according to Rav Yochanan says that we regard it as actual Shmini Atzeres, the day that it indeed is, then you don't even need to sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. Now, Amar Rav Yosef, Nakot Rav Yochanan biyadecha. We should paskin like Rav Yochanan that you do not need to dwell in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. Why? Demara dishmaisa money. Rav Yehuda Bered Rav Shmuel bar Shilas. Who was the one who conveyed the lesson? In the name, right? Rav Yehuda Bered Rav Shmuel, in the name of Rav, that you need to sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. It was Rav Yehuda Bered Rav Shmuel. Ubishmi savek shvi lebar mitsukkah Yosef. the very person who conveyed the message, a Shita of Rav, that you need to sit in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, he himself did not sit in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. So even the Mara Deshmaisa, the master of the teaching himself, did not actually hold by it. So that
Rabbi,
if he's the messenger and he doesn't hold by it, we're
sorry.
not bound by it either. Let me just get one more line in if possible, because this is the most important line. If there's one thing you remember from everything tonight, it's this line in the Gemara. The Gemara has a conclusion. The Hilchasa. What's the halacha? What do we paskin? Mesav yasvinan bruche lo mevarchinan. We sit in a sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. We do not make a bracha of leishev, and we also make the insertion for Shmini Atzeres, not for sukkahs. But the conclusion of the Gemara couldn't be more explicit. Is to sit in a sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, just without the bracha. And the Shulchan Aruch asks that way, and that is normative halacha. And somehow, some people following a more mystic tradition, a more Hasidic tradition, they go together. Toby, your good friend, the Minchas Elazar, ancestor, right?
What does he do?
What?
What does he do?
He not only defends those who don't dwell in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, he has a lengthy tshuva in which he does this in many areas, by the way. Dancing on Shabbos. There are other examples. There are other examples as well, in which basically he turns everything on its head. The dancing on Shabbos sugya, he says, why did Chazal prohibit dancing on Shabbos? It's for those who are not on the madrega to connect to Hashem through that. But we, who are all bnei aliyah, who should strive to be on the madrega to connect to Hashem, should all be dancing and clapping on Shabbos. So he goes on. So here also, he doesn't just justify not dwelling in the Sukkah Shmini Atzeres. I believe he quotes a Zohar, who says that Shmini Atzeres is, Mala min hateva. It's 8, right? It's above teva. It's above nature. And it represents the Geula, the days of redemption, where God's glory will be out in the public for everyone to see. And so for us to hide away in our little huts on Shmini Atzeres demonstrates a lack of bitachon in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he'll one day show his glory on the whole earth. And therefore he says, if you're a real tzaddik and a real believer in God, you dafka don't sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. But it's explicitly against the Gemara. There are earlier sources. I think there is in the Rishonim already. I think maybe some of the students of Rashi. I have to look back at this. I gave a shir on this like 2 years ago, so I have to check my notes. There are earlier sources that justify it as well, but I mean, the Gemara doesn't always give us a conclusion. The Gemara sometimes just leaves a machlokis, and then you have to like look at the Rif and look at the Rush and the Rambam and the Torah and figure things out. So one time I had to give a Dvar Halacha. This past Sukkot. I gave a Dvar Halacha between Mincha and Ma'ariv. I took out the Shulchan Aruch. Eli Reichner really appreciated this one. He comes over to me every now and then. He's like, Rabbi, this is the best Dvar Halacha you ever gave. I said, guys, I have a book here. It's called the Shulchan Aruch. It's pretty much accepted as the normative code of Jewish law. I crack it open. I read the line in there, which is basically taken from the Gemara. We sit in the sukkah. We don't make a bracha. So I said, if you see any really weird people for some odd reason insist on dwelling in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, all right, they have the Shulchan Aruch and the Gemara to rely on. All right. Anyway, back to our feature presentation.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I'm waiting.
Yes. Oh, sorry, Phyllis. Yeah. Thank you for waiting. That was a long last line, I know.
Impatiently, I should say. So Shmini Atzeret is the 8th day of Sukkot, right? Or the 8th day of the Sukkah holiday.
Sukkot's part is the addition on your end.
But it's past the 7th day.
It is past the 7th day. Yes, Shmini Atzeres.
So since it says very clearly, B'Sukkot Teshvu Sheva Yamim, so why would anybody think that you are obligated to sit in the sukkah?
Because we're talking about Chutz La'aretz, where we do Sveika Diyoma. You're right. In Eretz Yisrael, this entire conversation is moot. This is talking about Chutz La'aretz, where we do Sveika Diyama, where and we talked about in a previous year that Tosos cited the Gemara in Beitza, I believe. We're afraid of persecution, where there will be times that we will lose track of our calendar, and there might actually be real Sveika Diyama. So
So
that's
the same reason why we have Yontif for 2 days
exactly.
instead of one day?
This is precisely that. This is precisely Yom Tov 2 days, just on the back end of Yom Tov. Exactly. That's exactly what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a suffix, it is the 8th day, but we treat it as a suffix 7th day. So, and 7th day is still Sukkot. So hence we get this weird amalgamation of sitting in the Sukkah while our liturgy reflects Shmini Atzeres.
So they don't sit in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeret in Israel, is what you're saying?
Correct. They would not need to do that. In fact, they probably shouldn't, because then there's an issue of Baal Tosef, or at least the appearance of Baal Tosef, of adding on an additional day of Sukkot. So you're supposed to, at least, even if you want to use your Sukkah as a hut to relax in, you're supposed to stop for one day as a hefsek. That way it is nicker, it is recognizable that you are no longer doing it for the mitzvah, and there's no appearance of Baal Tosef. Yeah. Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, going forward, my friends. Amar Rav Yochanan. Omrim Zman Bishmini. Okay, so now we're going to talk about making the bracha of Shechianu. So, Phyllis, related to what you brought up, I mean, do we make a Shechianu on Shmini Atzeres? And the question is, this is contingent on, what was that, Phyllis?
I would say yes, since it's a separate holiday.
Very good. So you're already way ahead of us, because that's what the Gemara is going to get to. You already know the conclusion, but let's see how they get there. Amar Rav Yochanan, Omer Zman b'Shmi Chag. We make the bracha of Shechianu, the bracha of Zman, of time, on the 8th day of the holiday. The Ein Omer Zman b'Shmini Shel Pesach. However, on the 7th day of Pesach, which is the last day of the Pesach holiday, we do not have a Shechianu. Amar Rav Levi bar Chama v'itim Rachama bar Chanina. Teda shari cholok begimel dvarim, because there is a distinction between the first days of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres. B'Sukkah, v'Lulav, v'Nisach. We have the mitzvah of Sukkah, the mitzvah of Lulav, and the mitzvah of Nisach HaMayim. Rabbi Yehuda, Damar below Kaya Menaseh Kol Shmona, Hari Cholok B'Beis Dvarim. Okay, so for him, it was just 2 matters. Fine. But the point is that there's a distinction. There are certain mitzvahs that are only done during Sukkot, and they do not appear on Shmini Atzeres. This would seem to indicate that Shmini Atzeres is an independent holiday. Ihachi, if this is so, Shvi Shal Pesach Nami Hari Chalak B'Achias Matzah. But what do you mean? The last day of Pesach, it's not Chol Moed, right? It's a holiday again. We can't do Malacha, but it is distinct from the first day, because there is no mitzvah to go out of your way to eat matzah. On the first night of Pesach, one needs to eat matzah for the mitzvah of matzah alone. We haven't eaten matzah also on the 7th day of Pesach, because there's an obligation to have a meal. So once you have to have a meal, you have to have matzah to have a meal. But it's not inherently a mitzvah of eating matzah. So we see from the fact that there is no mitzvah of going out of your way to eat matzah on the 7th day, it also is distinct from the first day. Maybe it ought to have its own shechianu. Damar Mar, Laila Rishona Chova, Mikam Ve'elach Rishos. The first night of Pesach, there's a mitzvah to eat the matzah, just like the first night of Sukkot, there's a mitzvah to sleep in the sukkah, and to eat in the sukkah. But from onwards, it is discretionary. So what would we say to this? Hachi hashta? Are you really going to try to make a comparison between the 7th day of Pesach and Shmini Atzeres of again, I say of Sukkot, it's sort of it's like a whole shear you can give on this. Like, it's part of Sukkot, but it's independent. Okay. Hachi hashta hasa milayla chaluk miyomeno chaluk hacha afilu miyom nami chaluk. So here's the thing, though. On Sukkot, though, the mitzvah of Sukkah is at night. It's at day. You have mitzvahs that are, you have the mitzvah of Lulav at day. But when it comes to the mitzvah on Pesach, it's just the mitzvah of matzah at night, and then we call it a day. So it is distinct in that fashion that there's a big distinction between Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres, because Sukkot you're doing mitzvahs at night, you're doing the Sukkah at night, you're doing the lulav and the lulav hadatzim revos during the day. So there is a much clearer distinction, a much more recognizable distinction between the first days and Shmini Atzeres. That's one suggestion. Rabina Amar, Zechag Mishalefanav, V'zechag Mishalefnei fanav. Rabina says that there's a distinction. Shmini Atzeres is different than the day that immediately precedes it. The day that precedes Shmini Atzeres, right, the final day of Sukkot on Shana Rabbah, we're still shaking the lulav and esrog. Come Shmini Atzeres, we do not take the lulav and esrog. So there's a clear demarcation between the day preceding Shmini Atzeres and Shmini Atzeres itself. Whereas the final day of Pesach is distinct only from if we rewind to the first day of Pesach. The first day of Pesach, there's an obligation, well, first night of Pesach, there's an obligation to eat matzah. But then the rest of Pesach, you don't have to eat matzah if you don't want to. And the last day of Pesach, even though there's an Isser Malacha, it's not fundamentally different than the days of Chol Moed that preceded it. So in that respect, it doesn't have a special mitzvah. So that's another distinction. Shmini Atzeres is clearly distinct from the immediate day that precedes it. Hence, we make the Shechianu. The seventh day of Pesach is not so distinguished in terms of its mitzvos. Amar Papa, and then just additional distinctions. These ones now are derived from the Torah itself. Hachaksiv par, hasam ksiv parim. So here it says one par for the final day. There it says parim in plural. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar hachaksiv bayom. Here it says bayom. Hasam ksiv ubayom. Rav Ashi Amar hachaksiv kamishpat. Hasam ksiv kamishpatam. So again, just from like the language itself, we see there's like a singular nature to the final day of Shmini Atzeres that distinguishes its karbanos and its laws from the rest of Sukkot. So these are just indicators from the Psukim themselves that if we read the Psukim closely, it seems to indicate that the Shmini Atzeres is an independent holiday. Now, all these proofs might seem just not particularly strong on their own. Like it sounds like, I forget the metaphor, like you're throwing things at. That's okay. You throw things at a wall and see what sticks. Is that how it goes? Am I getting my metaphors right? Right? Like we're throwing things at a wall. Hopefully one of them is going to stick. That's what it feels like. So the Gemara is going to actually give us a little bit more of an explicit precedent. Maybe we have a proof here. Haparim ha'elim v'akvasim, Achman says that if there's a day where you don't have the prescribed amount of karbanos, you're short on cows, you don't bring the rams, you don't bring the sheep. You need all the karbanos together. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, parim ema Achman that the cows will not withhold the other offerings, shari mismat and v'holchin, because we see that even as we get to the end, as the days go down, they diminish in number. So from the fact that the offering of cows is not consistent from one day to the next, shows that it's not really so essential. Amrulo, v'halo kula mismativ v'holchin b'shmini, but don't they all, like on the 8th day on Shmini Atzeres, don't all the karbanos decrease in quantity? Amar lehen, Shmini regal bifnei atzmohu. There's your line. There's the line there, guys. Shmini is a regal bifnei atzmohu. It's an independent holiday. Couldn't have said it more explicitly. Shekeshem sheshivas yimei echag tu'unin karban b'shir ubracha v'lina. The same way, the first days of the holiday, they require their karbanos. They have a special song for them, and that the Leviim sing, and a bracha, and also lina, which is after you bring your karban, you don't just skedaddle right away, but you're supposed to stay overnight, not just like bring your karban and then like take the red eye out. Av Shmini ton karban ushir ubracha v'lina. So too the 8th day has its own karbanos, its own shir, its own bracha, and also an obligation of lina. Now you might be wondering, what is this special song that the Leviim sing on the 8th day? So the Gemara doesn't tell us. Rashi himself isn't even sure. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says, "Lo purishly shir shel Shmini." I don't know what this special song is, though he does point out, based on another Gemara, that later on in the Masechta, actually, Nun Hey and Aleph, so toward the end, that the songs that they would sing in general on the holiday, Kulan Remuzim al Iske Matanos Aniyim, they surrounded the theme of giving gifts to the poor. That way, people would come to the base of Mikdash and they'd be encouraged to give tzedakah. Tosos, though, actually fills in something for us. Let me check this out. I think it is the 14th chapter in Tehillim. If I can just pull this up on my, I don't have a Tanakh right here, but I do have my phone, which has a Tanakh on it. Let me just pull this up for a moment. Let's go to Tanakh, Tehillim. And I think it's Tehillim. Following my references, Tehillim Yud Beis. Indeed. So if you look at the 4th capital of Tehillim, it says Lamatseach al Hashminis Mizmor LeDavid. Shminis, like Shmini Atzeres. So they sing the 14th psalm, the 14th capital of Tehillim. Lamatseach al Hashminis. That's what Tosa says. How apropos.
Yeah.
Fits very nicely. Yes, Toby.
I've been confused since the beginning of the class about probably something that's so basic. You were saying that if this was in Israel, we wouldn't even be having this discussion. It's moot.
Yeah.
But they do call it Shmini Atzeret in Israel, right?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So let me clarify. So Shmini Atzeres.
So in other words, they have 8 days. We have 9.
Yeah.
But it's still the 8th day. They have 7 plus 1, correct? In Israel.
Right. So let me clarify. This is good to clarify. Right.
Okay.
So Shmini Atzeres is in the Torah. We have Shmini Atzeres. But Shmini Atzeres in the diaspora is also Suffolk the 7th day. So then we pretend that, oh, maybe it's really still day 7 of Sukkot. So then we have this question of, do I sin the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres because, oh, maybe it's 7th day of Sukkot. But also, how do we get the holiday of Simchas Torah? There's no holiday called Simchas Torah in the Torah.
In Israel. Right. And they don't have it in Israel.
Or even, like an idea of Simchas Torah is just like, oh, we already have this holiday Shmini Atzeres that we're not quite sure what to do with in the first place. And then on top of it, we now have a Sveika de Yoma on Shmini Atzeres, which already was a holiday that was lacking a lot of, iconic mitzvahs associated with it. So I guess we're going to have a holiday called Simchas Torah since we're finishing up the Torah now anyway, right? That seems to be more or less what happened.
And what happened to Hoshana?
What?
What about Hoshana Rabbah? Where does
that we
come
discussed in
into
the
play?
previous year. But I mean, basically they had every day of Sukkot in the Beis HaMikdash, they would do one hakafa around the Mizbeach, and then on the final day, which then came to be known as Hoshana Rabbah, they would go around 7 times.
When did that start? When did it start, Hoshana Rabbah?
They did it in the Beis HaMikdash, and then when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, we started doing it as a zecher,
But it's not mentioned. It's not mentioned in the Torah, right?
It's in the Gemara.
Okay.
Yeah. The Hoshanas rituals are elaborated on in the Gemara. You're right; they're not spelled out in the Torah. That is correct.
Second day of Sukkot, though, so it's not Israel. It is Yontiv here, but we still call it second day Yontiv, right? Well, second day of Sukkot. But
it eats into our Chol Moed. But yeah.
Right. So there's less Chol Moed, but we still call them day 1, day 2, day 3. We're not saying we're repeating day 1.
Yeah.
Okay.
This passes, and eventually Simchas Torah becomes the extra day all the way at the end. And then on Pesach, we get an 8th day of Pesach, which is really just Suffolk 7th day of Pesach.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, good. Did that address the question or
mine anyway? Yeah.
Oh, okay, very good. I'm glad. I get sometimes my head starts spinning with all 8th day, 7th. It makes my head spin a little bit.
I have one more question, probably a silly one. So why do we need to have Yontif on the last day of the holiday? Where is that from?
So it's based on the Torah, but the But I think the idea is to bookend the yontif basically. I think the general idea is just like to bookend things. That would be my understanding, rather than to just peter out. That would be, if I had to give it tam hamitzvah, that would be my understanding of it. But I think he uses the language of Shabbos, and I have to look back at the Sukkah.
So when was it decided that there was Chol Moed
Here it says
and then Yontif?
just if I may, the in Bamidbar here, Parachav Tes, Pasuk Lamed Hey through Lamed Vav, it says, Bayom Shmini Atzeres Tielechem Kol Meleches Avoda
Mhm.
Sasu. So now
Yeah,
Shmini Atzeres, don't do any work.
no,
Black and white, right there.
What about with
I
Pesach?
understood. How about Pesach? Yeah, right. That's the.
I need to find the psukim. I'm not a one of those people who knows Tanakh by heart.
There's
But
nothing special on the Pesach on the last day, is there?
it's in the psukim, I believe. I just
Well,
Okay.
if you're Lubavitch, you're doing the Mashiach Suda, right?
yeah,
Well, that's
it's funny. Like I
added.
only heard of these things when it's like when I came to Good Shalom, like then I heard of like people say Aziz and Pesach. I never heard of it
Yeah.
before. It's a Chag Kasher V'Sameach.
Yeah.
Uh,
So Rabbi came and told me. He said the pshat was that people didn't like saying have a Chag Kasher V'Sameach. They felt that was too religious. So
uh,
then they said Aziz and Pesach. That way, like it still sounds Jewish because it's Yiddish, but you take away the kasher part. That's what he told me. I I grew up in the yeshivish world. No one says Aziz and Pesach.
and we also added Yiskor too to the last days of holiday.
Yes, it used to just be Yom Kippur, and even then, like the ritual that we do, they didn't have all the poems back then. That's also something I only found out when I came to Good Hashem was like the poems in the book.
But
And
it's
then,
no
but the
reason to
Sephardim
have
don't do
Yontif.
at Yizkor or like all these times that we do as Ashkenazim. But
Oh,
Ashkenazi rabbis realized it was a great fundraising opportunity, so
but maybe it may lend credence to the reason why they have a seventh day of Yontif. Why?
yeah. But I mean, the 7 Day Yontif existed before Yizkor did. Um,
I
you go to
understand,
the
but
Sephardic Minyan, like pop in there, they won't even know what you're talking about if you ask for Yizkor. Um, they
uh
What? They don't do Yisker?
maybe I have to check on Yom Kippur if they do some version of it because that is an earlier source. But otherwise, I don't believe they do Yizkor, all those other holidays.
Oh, I'll have to ask David.
The idea basically is on Yom Kippur, there's a drasha that you're giving tzedakah as a kapara for your loved one, because that's the theme of the day of Yom Kippur. Otherwise, Yizkor doesn't really have anything to do with like
well,
Sukkot and with
it it does
Shavuot.
it. It's all over the tefillot on Yom Kippur.
Right. I mean,
Yiskor.
that's the
They
source.
remember. Yeah,
That's where it comes from. That's where
yeah,
it comes from. But then we
yeah.
expanded it. Um, anyway, people come to shul. I'm not going to complain. People want to honor their loved ones. That's great. It's I'm not complaining about that.
It's an opportunity to get people to shul anyway.
Yeah, it is. All right. But you'll probably not see it say in the Gemara, come on the 7th day or the 8th day rather, and practice Yizkor because it
Mm.
was added in later. Let's just wrap up the Gemara for tonight. So why do we bring this all up? My lav zman. So we see that there's a mention of making a bracha on Shmini Atzeres. So it sounds like you're supposed to make a bracha. What's this bracha refer to? Perhaps it's the bracha of Shechianu. Maybe this is the proof to make a Shechianu Shmini Atzeres. Lo birchas hamazon utfila. No, maybe it's a reference to a different bracha of benching, of inserting Shmini Atzeres as a Shmini Chag Atzeres as in benching and in Shmona Esrei v'tvila. And Hachinami Yistaber Disakadait Zman Kol Shiva Meika. Also, this fits more nicely because we bench every day. We say Shmona Esrei several times every day, but we only say Shechiyanu once. So it sounds like you're making the bracha every day of Yontif. So hello, Kasha. Dilo Baricha Inam Avarich Lamachar Oli Yom Achrina. Doesn't mean you say Shechiyanu every day. What it's saying is, if you, whatever the reason is, you neglected to say Shechiyanu on the first day, you could say on the second day, on the second day, the third day, and so on. So but Mikol Malcolm Kosminan. But don't you need to make a Shechiyanu on a cup of wine? And apparently those were not as easy to get hold of as they are today. They didn't have Manischewitz back then. Rav Nachman Siman Omer Afilu Bashuk. Rav Nachman says you can make the bracha shechianu even without a kibus of wine. But inan kos kol yama miika. But what about the sheet who says that's nice for Rav Nachman, Shkai from Nachman, but we hold that you do need a kos in order to make shechianu on the kos. So where am I supposed to get a kos of wine? The Gemara says kasha namaisa dilma deikla lekos. What do you know? You were somewhere and they had a cup of wine, and indeed you can make shechianu. But the point being is that what comes out from all this in the Gemara is the making of the shechianu and Shmini Atzeres, because it is its own independent holiday. Though the Gemara still says we sit in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres just without a bracha. And that's a wrap, my friends. All right. I assume since you saw tonight's email, you saw the part where I said that the shiur for Sefer Chinuch will be 9 a.m., not 9:15 a.m. on Sunday, God willing. And we'll end earlier accordingly. And otherwise, that should be all. Hopefully, no other major changes to our schedule. All right. Have a good Shabbos, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. You too. Thank you very much.